All right, I think let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining for the November Near Southeast Steering Committee meeting. Let me share my screen here. All right. So today, I want to give just sort of a quick update on where we are and what's coming up with the engagement. And then we will go through some of the changes that we have been making to the draft recommendations to get ready for the public review draft, which will be coming out. And then we'll have time for any other questions or comments anyone has at the end of the meeting here. So first, on phase 4 engagement, we are, as I said, working on getting the draft plan put together. We are hoping to have it put together by next week. It may be the week after before it actually gets posted on the website and goes out to the community. But we are still on track to get it out before Thanksgiving. So hopefully early the week of the 21st is likely when it'll be posted. And that'll go up on the website, and there will be a mechanism for folks to review it and provide comments directly on the document. So if they have suggestions or things they'd like to change or questions, they can put those directly on the page, and we'll see those and be able to respond to them and make updates in the future updated draft. And then as part of the engagement, we are planning 2 community workshops, one in person and one virtual, like we did in the last phase over the summer. So our in-person community workshop is scheduled for Tuesday, December 6th at Cook Park Rec Center, starting at 5:30 in the evening. And then we'll do a virtual one the week after on Wednesday, December 14th at 6 p.m. So that is the same time as our steering committee meeting would be for December. So we'll do what we've done the last few times where we've had engagement, where we will have the virtual meeting take the place of the December steering committee meeting. And then our goal is to run the engagement through sort of mid-January. So we'll have about 2 months of engagement on the draft plan. We know that's going over the holidays. But we think with 2 months, that'll give folks time to review and comment on the draft plan. And so along with the workshops that we're planning, we will also be doing office hours like we did in the last round, where we will be at the rec center and the library and some other places where folks can come in, and if they want to ask questions, provide comments, have a more in-depth conversation with the planner about the draft plan, we'll be there. We'll also be continuing to do our intentional engagement, reaching out to folks who we know haven't been participating in the plan. We had good success last time with some food truck events targeted at renters, which, as we've talked about, is the group that we haven't been hearing as much from. And so we got actually some really good participation out of those events. So we're going to do something similar to those. We're still figuring out what exactly that is, since those were sort of outdoor food truck events in the summer, and those might be hard to pull off in December. But we'll do something along those lines that we think will continue to get better engagement from renters. And then we, as we have been doing, will attend any community events that are available. So if any of you know of anything happening in your community over the next couple of months where we could have a table or a booth or speak, let us know. We'd love to get on one of those events. And same with your organizations. If you're a part of an RNO or some other community organization, which I know a lot of you are, we'd love to come speak to your RNO at one of your meetings. We know, again, this is over the holidays. A lot of the RNOs don't have regular meetings. So if it has to wait until January or something when you start up regular meetings again, we will work with you on that. But we'd really like to come to RNOs. So if you are interested, if your group is interested in having a planner come speak about the plan and answer questions and take comments, please let us know, because like I said, we would really like to attend those. So that's a brief overview of what's coming up with the plan. Any questions or suggestions on any of that? Okay, if you think of anything, again, just don't hesitate to send me an email, or like I said, we'll have more time at the end of the meeting, I think, to circle back to things if something comes up. But with that, we will get into some of the recommendations. Again, some of this will be updates on what we talked about last month. Some of this will be updates or other changes or refinements we've made based on the internal review we've done. So we took all the comments from the community from the last round of engagement, made a whole bunch of updates to the draft recommendations, shared those with our internal city partners, so other folks within CPD and within other departments across the city, like Dottie and Host, and so that's the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, our Housing and Opportunity, Housing Stability Department, our Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, Parks and Rec. All of those departments have reviewed and made comments. So again, we've been making a lot of updates. So just wanted to go over some of those changes from versions you may have seen in the past. So starting with context, this is actually, we haven't made a change yet, but we got some comments on the internal review, and I've also gotten some comments from other folks, questions around the context designations. So as a reminder, the context designation is part of Blueprint Denver, which is our citywide land use and transportation plan. And the city is divided into essentially 6 contexts that are sort of a spectrum, from suburban on one end through urban edge, urban, general urban, urban center to downtown at the other end, with special districts sort of being a catch-all for some other things. So context gives direction on the sort of development pattern that is appropriate and should reflect the existing development pattern. So you'll see on the left there sort of the summary of what contexts are, reflecting those land patterns, lot and block sizes, density, how the streets work, where there are alleys or not alleys. So that's the intent of the context designations. And as we've talked about in the past, the vast majority of Near Southeast is suburban context. There are a few patches of urban edge context up in the northern portion of Washington, Virginia Vale, between Leedsdale and Alameda, west of Monaco. And then there's a few small blocks of urban edge in Virginia Village, just east of Colorado on either side of Florida. And then Colorado Center area is urban center, with a little bit of general urban and then urban edge as sort of a transition from that urban center to the rest of the suburban pattern. So that's the existing development. And we got some comments again from our internal reviewers that some of the goals we have in the plan sound less like traditional suburban. When we talk about, we want a more walkable environment, we want more pedestrian friendliness, we want smaller block sizes, we want to bring buildings closer to the street, although not right up to the street. These types of things that maybe it makes more sense that we should be designating some areas urban edge instead of suburban. So we wanted to have a conversation about whether we thought keeping it suburban was appropriate, or whether we should be changing some areas to urban edge. So what you see here is the definition in Blueprint Denver of the suburban context, which, as it notes, is sort of the most diverse context in Denver. It covers areas like this. It also covers the tech center is suburban context. A lot of far northeast out near the airport is suburban context. So there's a big variety of what can constitute suburban context. But typically, defined by its sort of curvilinear street pattern instead of the rigid grid, and an absence of alleys in the area. But it should be noted that what we describe in Blueprint Denver as the suburban context is not necessarily what you traditionally think of as the suburban context. This is an aspiration for a higher quality type of suburban development that is more walkable and bikeable and has better connections to daily needs. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So is that the only difference from traditional suburban areas is the bikeability and walkability?
Yeah, that's the big part of it, is that it's still generally a suburban development pattern, but it is something that embraces multimodal mobility options.
Okay, thank you.
And then here's the urban edge context definition, which you'll see some similarities. There's, in a lot of ways, not a huge difference between the suburban and the urban edge. But it is a little more regular, with short, predictable blocks, more likely to have alleys. And you'll see you can sort of see it on this map. That's the big difference between some of these areas, is the sort of more regular block pattern with the alleys in these urban edge areas than you see in the suburban areas.
Scott, one more thing, please.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful for me and for the public in general to have an easily readable chart that, the difference between suburban and urban edge is this. The difference between urban edge and urban is this.
Yeah.
To clarify why we're putting these particular designations in particular areas.
Yeah, that probably would be helpful. There is, these are pulled from Blueprint, and it has, these summaries in it, but I don't know that there's a clear chart like that is really laying out the specific differences between them.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful because this is written in planarese rather than good old English.
Yeah, that's always our problem, is even when we think we're writing in plain English, we're writing in planarese, because
I understand it's your job.
Yeah. Professional hazard, I guess. So this is the urban edge context definition, as I said. So we've taken a look at this. We think it still makes sense that suburban is the appropriate context. From what we've heard from the community, they like the sort of suburban feel of it, but they do want the improved accessibility, walkability, bikeability, somewhat improved look and feel of the neighborhood. But we think that, again, is within this definition of the aspirational suburban context in Blueprint Denver. But something we wanted to talk with the community about, whether they thought we should lean more towards urban edge or suburban, and whether we think, some of these areas that aren't, if we are leaning towards suburban, some of these areas that are urban edge, should they be considered suburban as well, or any thoughts on context designations for your Southeast? Jared.
Yeah, I guess my only question would be, it seems like suburban is definitely what it is. I don't know that I've heard anything about what it's going to be would be considered suburban, but that might just be simply the urban reality of Denver, I think, is just going to keep moving towards us. So you could call it whatever you want to. None of my friends in the suburbs, as they call it, consider where I live suburban at all. They don't consider it similar in nature because of the proximity, traffic patterns, business traffic, so I don't know that that's helpful, but I do think it's confusing if it kind of feels like Denver is urban edge more than suburban in a greater context of the metro area. But I guess if you're just talking about in the city and county of Denver, we are very much suburban compared to like urban core. But that feels like some nuance that gets confusing, probably depending on your audience. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but I would not consider the context that we are moving towards suburban. And it seems to be alley is the primary differentiator, which seems to be more of a time period than a functionality.
Yeah, you're right that, as it says here, that what we're talking about suburban is not, what people may typically think of as suburban, especially in the outer suburbs. It's kind of like when you go skiing that, each mountain uses green, blue, black, but they mean different things on different mountains. So a black on one mountain is not the same as a black on the other. So suburban in Denver is not the same as suburban in Aurora. But yeah, I can see why that could be confusing. And then I agree with your point that we are sort of moving towards, even within the suburban context, moving less towards that suburban thing, even as we are within the suburban context. That it, as it says, that the aspiration for suburban is a less traditionally suburban form of suburban. That is, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore.
I think this is where it sounds like Smurf. The word just is used too many times in the same sentence, and we're not really sure. So
yeah, exactly. You say a word too many times and it loses all meaning, and you don't know what you're talking about. So let me take a break and go to Jenny. Maybe she can provide some clarity.
I don't know that I could provide clarity to what you were just talking about specifically, but I can say just as a Denver native and growing up in like the Congress Park neighborhood, and I live in University Hills North now, my neighborhood that I live in now was definitely suburban growing up. But I think with the light rail coming in, it is really changed, and just Denver growing, it's changed. But my thoughts on the whole urban edge and suburban is I feel that it would be beneficial to, at the very least, rename the transit corridor to urban edge, if not even go further into the urban area naming, and get away from suburban, because I think that's where density, that's my personal thought. I think that's where density should happen. I think that's where walkability should be, and multimodal should be really focused on, so that people can get, I oftentimes drive to the light rail station, and I live in between two light rail stations because it's so painful to walk to one of those light rail stations. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Scott?
Yeah, I guess to jump off of what Jenny was saying there, like some of the other transit corridors like Colorado Boulevard and Leedsdale, I think there might be opportunity there to also kind of revisit that context designation. And it does feel like part of Washington, Virginia Vale, that's kind of like north of Garland Park there, where there is a regular block pattern. It seems like the urban edge context might make more sense for that, just based on our conversation that we've had so far. But just
like this area in here.
Yeah,
that's probably true. Any other thoughts on context? It sounds like from what Jared, Jenny, and Scott have said that we should be looking at potentially at least changing some areas to urban edge, more consistent with what the goals are in terms of the type of development and amount of development in those areas. Anyone have a differing opinion? I think we should stick with suburban. Judy.
I just saw an arrow up there, which is where I live. Those are, I don't know what you would consider suburban, not, but those are all townhomes in this area right here.
Yeah.
So what would you classify that as, suburban or?
Yes, I think that area is still a pretty suburban development pattern that would make sense staying suburban.
Yeah, because that's the Indian Creek area.
Right.
Indian Creek neighborhood. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, looking at all these cul-de-sacs and loop streets, that is a very traditional suburban type development pattern. All right. So unless anyone has any other thoughts, we will take a look at maybe modifying some of the context designations along the corridors, most likely where we're expecting some additional growth. And maybe change some of those to urban edge. That we can move on to places. So just wanted to quickly revisit this after our discussion last week, or last month, sorry, that there was some talk about potentially expanding some of the commercial or community corridor designations, especially on Evans. So just wanted to highlight that we have expanded the area of those community corridor designations at the intersections of Evans and Monaco and Evans and Holly to make those a little bigger, incorporate a little more of the corridor into the center. So that's just sort of an update on changes we made based on the discussion we had last month. So I'll just pause there for any questions or comments on that or anything else on the place map. If anyone now taking a look at it a second time has questions. Councilwoman.
Thanks, Scott. So the brown is the regional center and the pink is what?
Well, they're all shades of brown and pink.
Okay, well, I'm looking at Evans and
Yeah.
half of it's pink and bright pink and half of it's
Okay. Yes. So the pink is the community corridor and the brown is the community center.
Okay. And so what is the difference between them? So I see around Holly, it's community center.
Yeah.
Is that? It's funny because the key at the bottom, the colors don't really align with the map. So it's extra confusing with the pinks and browns, but.
You're right. They don't really match. That's weird.
But on the map, it's a bright pink and then it's a medium brown. How do you differentiate those two, community center versus community corridor?
Yeah. So a big part of that is sort of how the development is oriented, that on the corridors, it is very much oriented to the main street, to Evans, whereas the centers should be a little more self-contained, that they will have more multi-sided buildings and more concentrated development pattern. And that's also where we expect to see slightly taller heights. So those also match up with where we're recommending the increases in height along the corridor as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. And we will take a look at the key and the colors and make sure those are lined up. That's weird how that happened. Councilman. You are muted.
Again, being a relative simpleton, I think for the public discussion, we need to make it easier for people to figure out what these mean. If we can provide examples that they would be familiar with, for instance, of an existing community corridor, an existing center, regional center, be it, or community center.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have some of those in blueprint, so we can definitely pull those into the plan, so it's clear what we're talking about. Right, great. Anything else on place types? All right. So this one is weird spacing there. We, within the height recommendations, we have a recommendation around not allowing rezonings to greater heights than what the current entitlement allows, unless we have adequate infrastructure in place. So we've been trying to provide a little more definition or framework for how we can determine if we have adequate infrastructure in place. What do we mean by infrastructure? And what do we mean by adequate? So this came from concerns from the community and from this committee that, you know, especially Evans, but the other corridors as well, you know, are already congested. They don't have good sidewalks. They don't have good connectivity. They don't have a really good transit service on them right now. That, you know, it may be jumping the gun to allow a whole bunch of additional, more intense development on these corridors until we get the improvements in place. And we agree with that concern. So we wanted to develop some recommendations to address that and recognize that. And so that's what we're working on here. So we got a couple slides here going through this recommendation. But first, as I said, the general recommendation is not allowing folks to come in and apply for a rezoning for additional height until we have adequate infrastructure in place. And this also applies to duplexes, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. But also think about that in the context of duplexes that, as we talked about last month, there are areas within the neighborhoods where we're recommending allowing folks to apply to rezone to a 2-unit zone district. But one of the conditions for that is also that they have adequate infrastructure in place to support them. So both additional height on the centers and corridors and duplexes within the neighborhoods. Making sure we have the infrastructure in place before we allow the rezoning. So when we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about mobility, which includes pedestrian facilities, bike facilities, and transit, as well as water and sanitary sewers, and stormwater and green infrastructure facilities are the sort of main categories of infrastructure we're talking about. And then for the residential areas, really focusing on the mobility capacity that you know, individual duplex rezonings shouldn't have large impacts on the sewer system or the stormwater system, but we do want to make sure that these are going in places where we have the street network and the mobility facilities to support them. So is there a well-connected street grid in the area that has sidewalks, and that the sidewalks actually connect to places people want to go? And are there bike facilities nearby? Are the main things we would consider for where we should allow rezonings for duplexes, along with all the other criteria that, again, we'll talk about more in a minute. But you'll remember there's a whole bunch of stuff about design and affordability and preservation and all that stuff that will also apply. But so this is just looking at the infrastructure side of that. And then for the mixed use areas, the centers and corridors, have a little more detail in the criteria or how we want to evaluate this. But the idea is that rezonings to add height would go through a process we have called large development review, which is some additional internal review before things go to planning board and city council that includes a community meeting. And also allows us to do a more in-depth infrastructure analysis and create requirements for implementing infrastructure where it isn't up to snuff yet. So we would make rezonings that add additional height go through this process. And as part of that, we would do this infrastructure analysis that would look at whether we have a corridor study or a next step study for the area. And if so, have we completed the improvements called for in those studies? And if not, do we need to do a study before we start approving additional development in the area? Sometimes the development itself will provide the needed infrastructure, especially when we're talking about creating new streets, new connections, smaller blocks that we require the development to occur for that to happen. So will the development itself complete the needed infrastructure? Is it a big community priority? So if it's something that the community really wants to see happen, we want to take that into account so that we're not necessarily stopping, really important developments that would really benefit the community, even if maybe they don't fully meet all the infrastructure needs that would otherwise we would want to see. Will the development have significant impact on the infrastructure, the mobility system, water, sewer, and stormwater? Do we already have improvements coming in the pipeline? We just haven't done them yet, but they're already in the capital budget. We expect them to happen in the next couple of years. Or is there a mechanism in place to finance them, something like a metro district or tax increment financing, or a cost recovery district where the development would pay into a system that would build the necessary infrastructure? And then getting into sort of what we expect from the mobility infrastructure of well-connected street grid, walkable block sizes, sidewalks that meet our standards, and safe pedestrian crossings, and safe and connected bike facilities in the area. So this gets a little technical, but wanted to run this past all of you to see if you had thoughts or ideas for how we address making sure that we have that adequate infrastructure before we're allowing significant growth in certain areas. Lisa.
I think the criteria are fine, but I was wondering if is it just additional height or is it also additional density? So like, could you redevelop the center, maybe not increasing the height, but just like, just the center at Holly in Florida, for instance, just put, make it a little denser or something like that without good height. So maybe instead of just additional height, allowing additional density or development or something like that.
Yeah. So the way this is written right now, it would only apply to rezonings to allow additional height. We do have other recommendations about redevelopments and making sure we get appropriate infrastructure put in place when those come in. And so, those may or may not be tied to rezonings. You may be familiar with the Kmart redevelopment project. They didn't rezone. In that process, we used the LD, the large development review process, to get them to put in some additional streets and improvements to the Goldsmith Gulch drainage through there. So we have tools and recommendations around that. And the other side of that is that, as we've talked about, we have sort of bad zoning on a lot of these properties, either old code zoning, or it's a very suburban type of zoning that is not consistent with what the community would like to see in these areas. And so on the one hand, we don't want to make it more difficult for folks to rezone out of these bad zone districts into better zone districts if they're not adding height. But on the other hand, where we are adding significant height and density, we do want to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place. So that's the way we've tried to balance it right now, that this only applies to where we're adding height, and we have other recommendations around addressing infrastructure needs as part of redevelopments that don't add height, but we're it's something we've been talking about internally, how we make that distinction and whether we should make that distinction. So open to thoughts on that as well.
Scott, when you say, where is it under F, will the development have a significant impact on mobility? Does that include traffic?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the intent. If there's some development that is, dumping an obscene amount of traffic onto the street, that would, be a significant impact that we would want to make sure is addressed or mitigated before we approve a rezoning.
Yeah. One of the most frequent complaints I hear about developments is the lack of a formal traffic study. Do we or don't we require that? Under what conditions?
That's a good question. I don't know the detailed requirements of when and when we do not require a traffic study. As part of the LDR, the large development review process, if it is, I think we do almost always require a traffic study as part of LDR, but I can get more clarity on that.
Yeah, I mean, that is, and every time complaint I get from constituents, and I think it makes great sense that we have more demanding requirements to be sure that we're providing adequate access and egress.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Councilwoman.
Is this for any rezoning or just for a large one?
This would be for any rezoning in a center or corridor that is increasing height. So right now, there's not a size, a minimum or maximum size requirement. Again, we've been having that conversation internally. Typically in this area, we're not going to see folks applying for increases in height on small properties. The economics of developing a tall building on a small property don't really work in this part of town yet. Although I guess except for the Carvana, which is sort of its own weird thing. Although that's the building's fairly small, but the site is relatively large if you look at the whole thing. But we expect this to be mostly applied to the large shopping centers that would potentially redevelop in those community centers that we were just looking at in the place map, or if somebody acquires multiple properties and assembles them into sort of one redevelopment potential or opportunity. There would be a few properties cobbled together.
So I was going to use the Carvana as an example, but there's a lot of, in that same neighborhood on the east side of I-25 and south of Monaco, there's a lot of buildings that I think, people are going to start looking at for housing and other uses. It's a lot of industrial zoning and not very tall, but if someone wanted to look at a property that wasn't on Evans, but was just a building behind Evans, would they have to do this too if it wasn't big?
Yeah, if it was in the center or corridor designation on that place map, which goes a few, it doesn't just cover the buildings right on the street. It goes a little bit deeper. So down to it goes a full block deep, I guess, on the south side. Down to Warren.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Lupe.
Within those larger community corridors, I know that the rezoning or the zoning that changed out in Rhino was really lovely in the fact that they provided, I think, a certain setback requirement for both sidewalk as well as landscaping. Do you believe that there's opportunity where through incentives that there could be an encouraged amount of a kind of developable landscape and or additional setback that could really enhance the community corridor? I don't know if those conversations have ever taken place as to what those incentives could be, but in a way to kind of really enhance that kind of front edge, very similar to how the front edges of Evans, for instance, going west in the University Park area, versus where we're at right now on Evans east of I-25, which is, very much tight to the site.
Yeah, and that actually gets into some of the requirements I was talking about earlier of any development that wouldn't be tied to a rezoning. That would just be we want to update the zoning or the design standards in this area so that any redevelopment would have to put in appropriate setbacks and appropriate landscaping and wider sidewalks. And so that we get that, regardless of whether folks are rezoning or adding height, that should be the standard form of development going forward. And then also, not covered here, but another one of, you'll notice this is letter B, another one of these, actually, we'll get into this in just a minute, where we're calling for, again, where folks are rezoning to greater height, that we want to see sort of additional amenities provided with that. And one of those potential additional amenities is more open space and higher quality landscaping than what our standards are. So the recommendations are both to sort of raise the base requirements and then have that additional incentive on top of that. If people want to go taller, they need to provide even more benefits beyond the improved base. Councilman.
Yes, sir. I'm unclear again on what the term adequate infrastructure.
Mhm.
How would we define that? I mean, I know the areas we're talking about.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to get to with all of these criteria here of what do we mean by adequate. And so this is supposed to provide us guidance to make a recommendation. Again, for this specific recommendation or policy, it's tied to rezoning. So the way it would work is if someone would apply, they would go through the LDR process, we do this analysis, figure out what infrastructure is needed or is in the area. We would make a determination of whether we think it's adequate based on these criteria and the additional criteria in the infrastructure master plan review standards. And then that would go into our staff report and our recommendation to planning board and council. And we would say, we've done this analysis. This is why we think it does or does not have adequate infrastructure based on these criteria. And then you all would get a chance to vote on whether to approve it, determining whether it's consistent with the plan recommendations or not.
I understand. Thank you for that answer.
Right. Any other questions on or suggestions on the infrastructure stuff here? Right, moving along. So this gets into what I was just talking about in response to Lupe's question of additional policies around future heights. So in areas where additional height and growth is recommended, ensuring we have these elements of a complete neighborhood, which are community benefits or additional things, in particular affordable housing. So that's, as I was saying, we want to raise the standard so that all new development has a better quality of development. And then where we're increasing the height, there are sort of two ways that increased height can occur. So one is, as we've been talking about, folks can come in and apply to rezone to a greater height. They can, they have 3-story zoning now, they want 5-story zoning, they apply, they go through this process, it goes to planning board and city council. That's sort of the traditional way. And so if folks are rezoning or applying for rezoning to increase their base height, we want to make sure that we're getting additional community benefits. The other way is through the incentive program set up by the Expanding Housing Affordability Program that was approved earlier this year. And we've talked about this in previous meetings, but the way that works is within the existing zoning, within certain zone districts, but it's most mixed-use zone districts that you would see on a center or corridor. There are specific requirements that if they have to provide a certain level of affordable housing as part of a development, if they provide even more affordable housing than that base requirement, they can get additional height. And so there are sort of two ways that, as I said, that heights could go up. One is through the rezoning, the other is not through rezoning, but just by the development providing even more affordable housing than the base requirement, they can get a certain height increase. And so in some areas, there may be instances where both could apply, that an area currently has 3-story zoning. We're recommending a 5-story base zoning that could go up to 7 stories with the affordable housing. So we want to be clear about that on the maps. So we have a lot of explanation about how these things work together. This is sort of explaining what I just talked about. But one of the ways we have decided we want to try to make this as clear as possible for the community is by including 2 height maps in the plan. So the one on the left is what we're calling the base height map. And so that is the maximum heights that should be allowed in the zoning without taking the incentives into consideration. So that is following our sort of traditional zone heights of 3, 5, 8, 12, 20. And then the one on the right is the incentive height. And so that is showing the maximum that could be achieved with the affordable housing incentives. So that's in the 3-story areas, they can go up to 4. In the 5-story areas, they could go up to 7. 8 can go up to 12. 12 can go up to 16. And 20 can go up to 30. So the one on the right is showing the maximum heights that could be achieved with the potential rezoning to the increased base height, if that's appropriate, and the incentives. So again, the intent is to be as clear and explicit as possible of what the base height is and what the incentive height is. And this is how we think the best way to show it is, but wanted to get feedback on this from the committee. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Just so I'm reading the map correctly, our friends at Creekside Apartments looks to me like this map recommends 8 stories with an option to go to 12 under the affordability. Am I seeing that correctly?
Yes, yep, that's what it's showing right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Lisa.
Once again, here's a map that is crying for street names, and because
Yeah.
can't really see what anything is. I kind of know what the street names are, but I don't
Yeah.
see how anybody else would ever know. So I would hope you would add those.
Yeah.
Why is Indian Creek, why does it have 2 different heights, both in the future base and the incentives? What is it about those neighborhoods that are really that diverse that the heights would be different? They're all 2-story duplexes and townhomes pretty much now.
Yeah, it is the difference between the single unit and 2-unit areas and the townhome areas. Essentially, if we go back to the place map, you can see that the single unit and 2-unit areas are residential low, and the townhome areas are low medium. And so
But that's not really, it's not really correct, because like I can't point to it, but the area that is south of what you're saying is the townhome area is where I live, and they're all duplexes. And a few single family homes. So I don't understand why they would be, they're even less dense than the townhomes are.
And you're saying that's this area down here?
Yeah,
Okay,
I live south of Iowa, and so there's the park, right? And the park is along Iowa.
Yep.
So all of these, mostly the stuff that's south of Iowa, at least up to Trenton, is almost all duplexes. And then there's some single family that is actually east of there.
yeah,
And then south of there is the Granville property, which is mostly townhouses. So I just don't really understand. I think it's a distinction without a difference. What's the, actually north of me on Syracuse, it's all duplexes. But to the west, kind of closer to where Judy lives, then there are some townhouses. And then north of Florida, there are some townhouses. So I don't think this is modeled right.
yeah, we can certainly take a closer look at it, and would love to get,
It's really hard for me to tell without the street names, but I'm just trying to, align myself to, well, I guess that's where the park is. So then I guess where that triangle is. So actually I am in the yellow part, which
Right.
is low, right? So those are mostly the duplexes.
right on the south side of Iowa is duplexes, and then a little further south is townhomes. And then it
It's the
goes to
Granville, yeah. And then south of that is what, the single family?
Yeah, there's some single unit down here.
Right, okay. I guess I don't really. I think it's kind of a distinction without a difference.
Yeah, again, the idea is the reason we mapped it that way, and then I want to get your feedback on whether you think that makes sense, but I'll just try to explain what our logic was that single unit and 2 unit is what we call residential low. Anything more than that, townhomes, condos, things like that, is more appropriate to be low medium. And typically in the residential low areas, we map that as 2.5 stories. And in the low medium areas, that's typically up to 3 stories. So, but we're open to.
So when you get back to the heights.
Yeah.
I guess I don't understand why you're looking to have an idea of increasing the height or a base height guidance, because that's not indicative of kind of what's here now. So why are you saying that some of these townhomes, which are 2-story, are you just saying that you're going to change the zoning? Because I'm assuming this is not part of the zoning code, that this is one of those areas that's all PUDs?
Yeah, it's mostly PUDs or old code zoning with
Right.
terms and conditions.
So why, if it's all 2-story, why are you saying 3-story?
So the idea is that if these properties rezoned at some point into the new zoning code, the Denver zoning code, we would need to match them up with an appropriate zone district. And again, most of our zone districts that allow townhomes and condos like that are 3-story zone districts. But there is an SRH 2.5, I believe. So we could change this, we could change them to 2.5 stories if folks think that is the appropriate height. If these areas were to redevelop at some point in the future.
I guess I see that not much is going to change in the neighborhood in the next 20 years. It's
Right.
pretty much it's all built out, except for very small, probably unusable parcels that might not even be in Denver County.
Right.
So and the housing isn't that old, compared to some of the other areas. So I would see that, in the next 20 years, I really wouldn't expect this area to change very much.
Yeah, and you're probably right about that. these areas probably won't be redeveloped, and it's probably a moot point. So,
Right. Yeah, okay, thanks.
yeah, no, great questions and comments. Thanks for highlighting that. Any other questions or comments about the height maps, either, the framework we've developed here to try to show it, or specific height recommendations that you're seeing on the maps anywhere, or going back to the last couple slides about the incentives and the community benefits and things like that. Jenny?
Am I seeing a down zone right at the corner of Colorado and Yale, from 8 stories there down to 7 stories? That would be the University Hills Plaza, I think.
Yeah, I think that is a mapping error on our part, that should be 12 stories on the incentive map, because it's 8 stories on the base map. So the incentive would allow that to go to 12.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's just a mistake on our part. Thanks for catching it.
All right. Yeah, I've never seen the down zone happen, so.
Yeah, no, that is not the intent
Right.
there. Sure.
Maybe this was what Councilman Cashman asked earlier. The Creekside development that has been kind of talked about lately, is
Yep.
that up there, which currently it's sitting at 8, and with the incentivize would go to 12. But if I remember correctly, was it 12 or 20? What was the plan that got floated? And I think Cashman did a wonderful job of engaging that publicly, and then they came back and met with you. This is fun talking about somebody who's actually on the call, but nonetheless, where does that sit in regards to kind of the thing that was floated across as a potential redevelopment?
I believe they were showing 16 stories on that.
15 and 20.
15 and 20, that's right.
Okay, so this would effectively stop that from being a possibility. Is that correct?
That's where we get into the complicated nature of what a plan does versus.
I am not going to quote you in a future, meeting like
So-
Scott said this would never happen, but
No, right, but
these are the
they're-
mechanisms by which to discourage that.
it would help discourage that. They have zoning that would allow them to build essentially what they proposed. And they don't have to come in for a rezoning. They could apply to develop under their existing zoning. And if they meet the criteria for a development plan, they can develop that. If they wanted to come into the new zoning code and rezone, this would provide guidance on what the appropriate height is for the new zone district. So we would say an 8-story zone district is the appropriate zoning here. And that's what we would approve, and that would allow 8 stories base up to 12 with the incentive.
Okay.
The alternative is that we can initiate a rezoning of their property. So Councilman Cashman or Laura Aldrete, my boss, could say, we are going to apply to rezone this property with or without the owner's consent. And so that would then take that away. And this plan would again provide guidance for what the appropriate zoning is for that if we did do that. But so it would take a rezoning for this height guidance to have an effect, and that could either come from the applicant or from the city or city council.
And just maybe to clarify, when we get into like interacting with the public, because they haven't had the joy of listening to all of our conversations, just being clear about like the plan is only providing guidance, then that it is actually not rezoning anything is probably going to be really important for people when they see this to not hear that there is rezoning going on. There's just guidance about the potential of future rezoning.
Yes.
If I'm hearing that correctly.
No, you are correct. And that is what this big paragraph is trying to explain, along with some other things. But yes, that is always something we are trying to be clear about. It is something that is sometimes hard for folks to grasp is what's the difference between what the plan is saying and what the existing entitlement is, and how do those interact. But yes, you're right. We do need to be as clear about that as possible, and we are trying to do that.
Thanks.
Great point. All right, any other? Yeah, and as Jason says, it's multiple places in the plan as well, so. It does require folks to actually read the plan though. Let's go to Judy.
Yeah, coming back to the earlier question from Lisa. I'm looking at the map and I see the triangle and I see the park. Then I see my area. But then across from me, again, is Place Middle School area. So you're proposing there, again, 4 stories. Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah, that's what the map is showing is it would be a 3-story base height if they rezoned and wanted to develop something else on that 3-story base that could go to 4 stories if they provided the additional affordable housing.
Mhm. What do you do with something like this where you know that there is a methane gas in that area below, or redevelopment is going to take a lot to move all that out?
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, that's something that is addressed at the development plan, or as part of that large development review process that we were talking about earlier. That that's when we do all of that sort of technical analysis of are there hazards in the area, what sewer and electricity and so on and so forth do we need to serve this, and can that be installed and all that stuff. So
Right now there it's mostly solar
right.
panels in there.
Yeah, that property just north of the school itself that is owned by
Mhm.
DPS, right? They have those solar panels on it.
So that's something else that might be taken into consideration, I would imagine.
Yeah, we know there was that proposal a few years ago from the school district to develop housing on that, and we know there was some concern from the surrounding community about that. But we do think that is an opportunity to add some additional housing in the area that could help improve affordability. So we will be looking to see what the community says about this when it goes out. It could be one of those things that gets a lot of feedback from the community, and we want to hear it.
Well, right now it's being used in a pretty good way with the solar panels.
Right.
There, so.
But those solar panels could go on top of the building, right? That we could keep the solar panels and also have additional use on it, or we could do other things with the property and keep the solar panels. So they're not necessarily the only use that could go there, even if we value having that solar in the community.
Thank you.
Good questions. Thanks, Judy. Lisa.
I'm curious as to with both the future base and the future height guidance of the little strip center at Holly in Florida.
Yeah.
So it's not currently 2 stories, is it? Aren't those mostly 1-story buildings, or?
Yeah. Some of them
So
are-
what would you envision the 2nd story to be? I mean, what would it be?
It could be anything, right? It could be office space above, it could be residential above. The biggest issue is that 2 stories is basically our shortest zone district. We don't have 1-story zoning anywhere really. So
I kind of thought, frankly, I know that the neighbors don't want anything really tall, but to do any kind of a mixed use kind of something in that area, it would seem that it would require to be 3 stories. And I thought we were trying to avoid, these strip commercials that, that basically align the back of the property with a sea of parking in the front. So it doesn't look like that's really going to have any opportunity to change. It's current like footprint of being, a small strip center with a sea of parking. And it's not a sea, it's a small sea. Let's call it a little lake.
A lake of parking, yes.
A lake of parking.
You're right. That's a trade-off. This doesn't preclude the opportunity for development or for improved development. Somebody could put, like that gas station that's actually on the corridor could go away and we could get a development there closer to the street, or elsewhere on that parking lot if they want to reuse some part of that parking lot without fully redeveloping it. But yeah, by keeping it at a 2-story maximum, it is reducing the incentive to fully redevelop the whole thing. If you recall, in the draft recommendations that went out over the summer, we had included in those that this area could potentially be 3-story base with a 4-story maximum under the incentive. And this was the area where we got by far the most comments about the appropriate height, with the vast majority of them being 3 stories or 4 stories is too tall, keep it at the existing height. So this was one where we got pretty strong, pretty clear guidance from the community that folks wanted to see this kept at 1 to 2 stories. And so that was a change we made from the initial policy that we shared over the summer. All right, anything else on heights? Okay, moving on then to the duplexes. So again, we spent a fair amount of time talking about duplexes and missing middle last month, and so wanted to sort of give an update on some of the changes we made to try to address some of the comments and concerns from the committee, as well as some of the other comments we've gotten. So again, starting with the sort of broader residential goals of providing a variety of options in residential areas, making sure we are improving the design for new construction and additions in these areas, and also promoting preservation, preventing involuntary displacement, promoting affordability as we add these additional units. So this is where we have mapped that duplexes could potentially be appropriate. And again, getting into the criteria where they could be appropriate. So the sort of pinkish reddish color is where they could be appropriate just with the adequate infrastructure that we were talking about earlier. In the purple areas, that's where there would have to be some preservation of the existing structure along with the adequate infrastructure to allow duplexes. And in the blue areas, that's where there would need to be some affordability guarantees along with the infrastructure requirements. Councilman.
Yeah, can you go back to the last slide, Scott, please?
Yeah.
So here we start with provide a variety of high quality housing options ranging from triplexes and townhomes. This is the first time I think I've heard triplexes.
Yeah, and that one is tied to the, at the end there, the low, medium, high, medium, and high residential places. So that's not the single unit areas, but the areas that are slated for more intense residential development. But yeah, triplexes is, just 3 units together, right?
Yeah, no, I get that. I'm wondering why, since we've been talking about duplexes, why don't we say from duplexes?
Yeah, and
Confuse the issue.
yeah, we could. Again, this is looking at 2 different areas. If I can go back to the map here quickly, that this is the duplex recommendations are looking at just the residential low areas,
Right.
which are the yellow in this map or covered up by the duplex colors. And this first bullet is applying to the low, medium, high, medium, and high
Why don't,
residential areas.
why don't we say then residential, low, medium, title the sections?
Yeah, yeah.
rather than both look the same.
Yeah, that's just how it ended up in the PowerPoint. They are separate recommendations in the actual plan, so it should be clearer.
Good.
As I was just summarizing things into the PowerPoint, they ended up like
Thank
that.
you.
All right. And then again, getting into sort of the criteria for when these duplexes should be allowed. First, addressing the character, making sure that we are making the design improvements before we start allowing duplexes, so that they come in at appropriate scale and fitting into the community. And then getting into the affordability, that we want to make sure that where we are allowing duplexes in the anti-displacement priority areas, that those come with the affordability guarantee. And then also that we are in the preservation priority areas, applying the requirement to preserve the majority of the existing structure. So questions or comments on the duplex, either from where it's mapped or the way we're talking about it in the policies here. Adrian.
Apologies, I was gone last week, so I see someone was nice enough to chime in where I usually do about the couple of neighborhoods that I truly care about with the mid-century stuff in there. So thanks for whoever did that. So a question on how it obviously relates to the existing. So obviously, Linwood, we've been talking about what to do with our, as this gets played out and how we preserve what we have. With the existing overlay they have, how will that play with duplexes going forward? Like, are they even allowed there, or will this kind of supersede what they have there, and kind of just trying to think how they go forward with it, and we do as well?
Yeah, so that is something that we call out to be addressed, that we need to, as we're creating these zone districts and design standards, take into account the existing overlay and making sure that we're not creating conflicts with that or overriding what that overlay is trying to achieve.
Okay, that was more of my question. Let's say I know it's the kind of odd of like which came first, and obviously it's a self-imposed overlay for that one. So it's like we're talking Linwood about something similar, what to do there, but just interested how this would play out with that. And I know there's no other conservation overlays in our near southeast, but good to know on that it would kind of remain intact without this superseding it per se.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly the intent, that we've heard from the community that they like these things, especially where we have the overlays in place, that that we really like that design, and we don't want to ruin that by allowing redevelopment of or development of duplexes.
Right. Okay. No, it's good to know. And that's obviously, I saw that was kind of mapped out on the thing already to kind of preserve what's there, and do the duplexes around that. So cool.
Right.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, great question. Scott.
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, does this apply to ADUs as well, or is this just turning a property into 2-unit duplex?
This section is just about creating a 2-unit duplex. There's other recommendations around ADUs, basically saying implement the recommendations of the ADUs in Denver program, which we had a presentation about a while ago, that are developing improvements to how ADUs are or should be addressed in suburban contexts, and then allowing ADUs basically anywhere. Either folks can come in and apply for a rezoning to allow ADUs on their property, or we should look at neighborhood-wide or city-wide rezonings to allow ADUs across neighborhoods.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, sure. good question, because yeah, it's not covered in these policies I'm sharing right now. Jared.
I think the next slide was 3A. Is that referencing the pilot programs we had talked about in like specific areas? Then but the maps, it seems to be, are still where they were. Like the maps haven't changed at all. So there's not a recommended area to do a pilot program in as much as an idea of doing a pilot program. Am I understanding that? I was trying to absorb a lot of information in a short amount of time here.
No, yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it, that, you know, we haven't mapped or called out a specific area for the pilot program. We're just saying we should utilize pilot programs, and we can decide where the appropriate location for those are.
So then going back to the map, and we obviously had a lot of conversation about this the last month, because that is just as best as I can tell, all of Virginia Village is zoned for duplex. Then, if under all the right circumstances, all the right things were accomplished, is that correct?
A lot of it. There are just a couple areas that aren't. But yeah, the majority of Virginia Village under this would be eligible for duplexes if they met all the appropriate criteria.
Yeah, and the reason kind of for all of it, and it's mostly just to try to, I'm trying to think of like why people are going to object to it. And so I'm just trying to think through why all of it rather than some of it, or why certain things about preservation versus anti-displacement. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the reason the majority of the area is designated for potential duplexes is because it is fairly well connected and has sidewalks. So thinking back to the infrastructure conversation we had earlier, most of these areas meet the infrastructure needs, we think. And then as far as why some areas are preservation versus some areas are anti-displacement, the preservation areas were based on the Discover Denver survey that was done for Virginia Village. So Discover Denver is a citywide program where we're trying to basically survey the whole city. Virginia Village is one of the neighborhoods that has been done so far, and it identified areas of potential historic value. And then we also asked the community in the phase 2 survey early this year to tell us areas where they thought there was potential historic character value, and that influenced some of those designations. And then the anti-displacement is based on areas where they are considered vulnerable to displacement based on our equity measures, or areas where the land value is greater than the structure value. And so we think they're vulnerable to fast turnover if things start to redevelop the area.
All right. I probably have just a lot more questions because this seems to be the thing that's going to get the most pushback. So I'm just trying to kind of get some more clarity as we go. But I appreciate all the work and all of the language. I still think you're going to get a lot of reaction to the map.
Yeah, we expect to get a lot of reaction to the map. That's what we're being. This is intentionally being ambitious with the expectation that we will get a lot of comments, and we will make adjustments to it based on what we hear from the community. That we don't expect everyone to look at this and love it and say, all right, great, we'll take it to city council for approval. We're trying to be a little bit provocative, I think, with the way we're mapping this. So we'll see if that bites us in the butt down the road. Councilman.
Yeah, Scott, so let's say this map is accepted the way it is.
Yeah.
What would be the reason that this would not eventually lead to Virginia Village being completely duplex? Why would someone not Why would someone buy a piece of property and not build duplex?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that, the criteria around either affordability or preservation will likely put a lot of folks off. And even in areas that already have either designation in the plan that they can go to duplex, that they can apply today and go to a duplex, or even already have duplex zoning, 2-unit zoning. We still see a lot of single unit houses in those areas. So, it's just, it doesn't all change over that quickly.
Right.
Even in areas where they already have the entitlements or have a plan that says they can have the entitlements.
So if, again, let's say this map is approved.
Yeah.
Are you saying we would start with a pilot program somewhere
Yes,
rather than? So how are we going to approve them? Okay, it's guidance, it's not a rezoning.
correct.
So we would then recommend in the plan, or would we recommend in the plan a particular area, or would that be a subsequent discussion?
Yeah, that could be either. Right now, we do not have a recommendation for a pilot area. With the intent that it would be a subsequent discussion whenever we get around to launching the pilot. But if there's somewhere we want to identify that we think would be a prime candidate for a pilot, we can put that in the plan.
Yeah, I'd buy earplugs and a face mask because I can name you a few people who are going to lose their minds.
Yeah,
Heavy duty face mask.
and so far this plan has not generated much controversy, so I think we are ready to get folks interested in the plan, and hopefully, as I said, being a little bit provocative here, we can get some really good engagement over the next couple of months of people diving into the plan and beyond just the duplex issue that they may have immediate reactions to, but we can get some good thoughtful input as well on the rest of the plan.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, good questions. Lisa.
So the area north of Garland Park,
Yes.
is that like in the yellow
Yep.
area?
Yep.
So what, I'm confused, maybe I'm just confused by this map. Is that not seen as an area to allow duplexes, or is it?
It is not.
Aren't there duplexes there now? Or isn't there a couple of there's no multifamily there? Or is that multifamily only in that anti-displacement incentive area?
So, okay, so on the west side of the green belt where it's
Uh-huh.
yellow, that is, we're not proposing allowing duplexes. On the east side here, where it's blue, we are under the anti-displacement, and then in the gray areas around that is designated low medium residential, so that would even be beyond duplexes. That would be getting back to the councilman's earlier question of the triplexes and townhomes and things
So
like that.
I guess I fail to see the difference. Why would you not promote duplexes in that area?
In which area?
In the Virginia Vale area, the yellow area?
The yellow area on the west side?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, that was tied to the street network in that area, that it is funneling basically everything onto Holly, that especially on the west side of Holly, there's no other connections. Everything has to go on to Holly, and even on the east side of Holly, between Holly and the green belt, it's more limited. So that was, again, our analysis and our mapping of it, but we're not perfect.
I do think that I think you'd get a lot less, well, you're gonna get pushback no matter what, let's face it, but I think you'd probably get a lot less pushback. I drive back there from time to time, just cutting through, every once in a while, you just want to cut through
Mhm.
and not, because of traffic. And so I'm not exactly like sure because the streets aren't all, they're not labeled, but I kind of thought there were some kind of townhousey looking things in that area. Maybe they're not exactly attached, but they've got that same kind of feel, but I'll have to drive back there. But I think that's kind of a lost opportunity for duplexes. I don't think that as accessibility is really, it's really that much different than the areas that you have designated in Virginia Village.
Yeah,
I don't think it's that bottlenecked. I mean, I think you can easily get to Monaco from that area, and it's got a good walkability component because it's close to a park. It's also close to a strip, some strip commercial and gas stations. It's close to the King Supers. It's close to that other strip commercial. So I think it's a lost opportunity. Not to designate that as an area that duplexes could be allowed and have the neighbors scream at you.
right, yeah.
That's all.
No, I mean, those are all good points. We'll take another look at it. Jared,
Yeah, just to maybe as recommendation for the map, if you could on it, put preservation incentive duplexes, anti-displacement incentive duplexes, because really you're talking about duplexes on the whole thing.
Yep.
I think it would help clarify like what you're actually talking about, like all of this is for duplex. And then back to Lisa's question earlier, all the gray area, either highlight or somehow designate that it is already zoned for greater than duplex. So I'm genuinely trying to help you on like public perception on this.
Yeah.
Because I think what people see here is everything that's changing about what they like.
Right.
And I think if you can say like, here's, as I always tell my daughter, anytime you're changing something, you want to also tell everybody what's not changing. And so I think if you can say, here's what we're recommending and change, here's what we're not recommending and change, that might be helpful as far as the map goes. And specifically kind of on where you have like multiple colors overlapped, that's I think the most confusing question. So like if there's any way to clarify, hey, it is a duplex, but it has to preserve the area and it also has to preserve some sort of anti-displacement. I think you're trying to say we're trying to do this as responsibly as we can. And I believe that. I'm just trying to figure out how do you get that on first blush. And by the way, I happen to live in the yellow area, Lisa, and I wouldn't be opposed to duplexes responsibly in the neighborhood. But considering I just had a vehicle drive across my front lawn because I live on Holly this weekend, I think Holly is going to have its own. Holly's going to be the next Evans. So we're already dealing with some stuff in the neighborhood. So.
yeah, thanks, Jared. That's great advice on highlighting what's not changing. We will clarify that on the map. Harvey.
Well, I'd like to talk about the area, the Winston Downs area.
Yeah.
In relationship to what you just talked about, the Virginia Vale area, you said there wasn't access. Access to Holly is difficult. And when you come into my neighborhood right now, access to Monaco, access to Alameda is almost impossible.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why you can increase the density there using a different criteria. If you're already using the criteria of accessibility as far as getting onto Holly in one area, why don't you use the same criteria when you're talking about my area?
Well, no, good question. We're trying to use the same criteria. So yeah, that northwest portion of Winston Downs that's designated for duplex, has connections to Alameda and Monaco, as you.
Connection doesn't mean it actually get onto the streets.
Right. So yeah, we're looking at the street network. We say it has connections, but that doesn't mean that you can make a turn onto Monaco or Alameda whenever you want to. So that was the reason that was designated. Again,
so I think you need to put something down there saying you're looking at it, but it's not really viable because you can't get onto those streets. And when we come up with a way to get onto the streets, then we'll look at it in a more a different light. Because
Yeah.
right now, if I know what's gonna happen, I'm gonna come into the meetings. People are gonna see that and they say, we can't get out of our neighborhood now. Why would you want to increase the density?
No, great point. Yeah, and we can look at how we can address that in the plan. Councilman.
Thanks, Scott. Have we made this broad recommendation of duplexes in other plans? I'm wondering if so, how they were received.
Not the way we have it formulated here around the preservation and anti-displacement priorities. We have had other plans in the past where we've recommended allowing duplexes in broad parts of the area, the parts of the Global Elyria Swansea plan recommends a lot of the single unit areas can potentially go to duplex. Part of the Evans Station area plan calls for areas around there to potentially go to duplex. So we have had, and this was what I was talking about earlier in these plans where we do have recommendations that folks can apply for a duplex that, not everyone has come in and done it.
Sure.
But these trying to tie it so closely to either preservation or anti-displacement. We have similar ones around preservation in the East and East Central plans. But the anti-displacement one is a fairly new policy approach that we're trying out here.
And on the preservation piece, and excuse me if I missed this, does that mean, one wall of the bathroom needs to be preserved, or what does that actually mean?
Yeah, that the intent is that they would preserve the majority of the structure, and we have something along those lines in the recommendations. And then the specific details of that would be figured out in the future regulatory project to implement it. Of is it 51%? Is it 90%? Is it some other criteria? But yeah, that it is not keeping one wall or just keeping the front facade or something like that. That you're actually preserving the majority of the structure.
Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Adrian.
This goes on to that, and it might be kind of what we're trying to get at, but not hitting right on. The obviously Virginia Village is technically suburban, like we chatted on. Some of those lots are huge, and so I think that's kind of where I'm also having the issue is, folks come in and they're like, holy crap, this is a massive lot, and then they're more apt to want to scrape and do two massive structures. So I guess on your other neighborhood areas that have had this, do they have as large of lots that are less incentivizing? Where here it seems like massive lots, easy profit, let's scrape everything.
Yeah, the other areas that I cited probably they're not suburban context like this and probably don't have as large lots. But that's also why we have the recommendations around improving the design standards to limit the size of structures before we start allowing duplexes, so that even on the large lots, you can't come in and put in a giant house on them or two giant houses on them.
Okay, that'd be more of my question, because obviously some of these folks use the building envelope as an actual envelope to build to, and they get those weird shaped buildings because they want to use every square inch of it. So obviously with these big lots, you could get some pretty massive structures that ending up. Okay, I'm glad it's in the recommendation as well. So just portion on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good question. And we didn't go over that tonight, but yeah, there are other recommendations in there that to ratchet down that building envelope so it isn't so big, and make sure we do that before we start allowing the duplexes.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful, because like I said, I just see this becoming a scrapezilla of that, just because we do have larger lots.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to figure out a way to allow additional residential units without creating this scenario where developers are just coming in, buying up multiple lots, scraping them, and putting in the big weird boxy houses that totally max out the building.
The weird angled roof on the side. So yeah, okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. All right. Anything else on duplexes? Okay. So, yeah, great questions and comments. Thanks for the feedback, and wish us luck as we share this with the broader community. All right, so those are the things I had to go over tonight. We still got time if there's other folks that, or other questions or topics folks want to talk about, but did just want to cover a couple things. One is, as we were putting the plan together, we want to include photos of the area. So if any of you have photos you like of the area, or over the next couple of months, you want to go out into your neighborhood and take some photos and have those used in the plan. We are looking for photos, so send us any photos you have or take over the next couple of months, and we will credit you for the photos in the plan. We're not going to pay you anything, but you will get your name next to your photo. And all your names will be in the plan anyway as members of the steering committee, but if you want an additional credit for photos, we're, like I said, we're looking for photos, and if we get them from you, that saves us having to go out and take them ourselves. And then the other is, as I mentioned earlier, we are having the virtual workshop on the night of our steering committee meeting in December, so we're going to cancel that meeting. But Councilman Cashman pointed out recently that we've never actually all gotten together and met each other in person. All of us, some of us have come to the walking tours or met at other events, but it might be nice as we're now approaching the end of this process, hopefully that we can maybe all get together. So wanted to sort of gauge interest in if folks had a desire to have an in-person steering committee meeting at some point in December in lieu of the one we would have had on the 14th. We can, treat it as a regular steering committee meeting. We could treat it as more of an informal get together. We could do sort of half and half, do an hour of actual work, and then maybe have a more relaxed, casual thing after that, or open to other ideas. So if anyone has any thoughts about an in-person get together of some kind, steering committee meeting or other, around the December timeframe. I know, folks are busy with holidays, so it doesn't even have to be December. We could do it some other time if December doesn't work for folks. Jared.
Yeah, we have a number of folks who are in the neighborhood who own businesses in the neighborhood. So like Unravel Coffee down at Holly in Florida. Could probably talk to Steve and get an after hours availability. If you wanted to try to do like a public without having all the public around. So.
Yeah, no, that'd be a great opportunity. Then, yeah, if we could find a local business that would let us use part of their premises for an evening, that would be awesome.
Yeah, give me a date and I'll reach out.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if folks are interested in this, maybe we'll send out a doodle poll or something to try to find a date that works for everyone. In the next in December or shortly thereafter. Lupe.
Are you gonna be able to send a Dropbox link or anything of which you would like these photos to be submitted to?
Yes, we can do that. Good question. If they're too big to email, we can give you a link to save them somewhere.
I'm just trying to save you from getting lots of additional emails.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. That's a good suggestion. All right, cool. So yeah, as I said, that's all I had to go over. So if anyone has any other topics or wants to circle back to anything we talked about earlier, or any other questions about the plan process, any other recommendations or policies that we've talked about in the past or haven't talked about that you want to talk about, we've got 20 minutes or so, or we can end a bit early. I know by saying that I'm discouraging anyone from bringing up a topic now, but please don't hesitate if there is something you want to talk about. We don't feel bad about using this opportunity. So,
Can you just give us the Carvana update and let us know how your nightclub plans are going?
that was Councilwoman Black's idea. So I don't know if she has an update on how she's pursuing that.
That's gonna be my next job. I'm gonna run a nightclub.
I
And there's
love it.
be like go-go dancers and stuff, and it's gonna be fun. Jared, you'll have to come.
I mean, you had me at nightclub, go-go dancers and my occupation might not go so well together, but nonetheless, it's all glass walls.
It's kind of reminding me of Amsterdam and not in a good way.
It'll
All
be fun,
seriousness,
people,
are they-
clean fun.
are they going to be able to inhabit that space, or is it just going to be a monument to all that could have been?
Bad corporate practice.
If you could just remind me of the architect on that one, who basically took this brilliant black brick with the sheen on it and then decided to whitewash it.
Yeah.
That,
I know.
the-
Yeah, it's weird.
Hey,
I
but
was
we
thinking the
do-
same thing. It was a gorgeous brick and then they just whitewashed it.
Well, it's not the worst thing we've seen on Evan.
Here's the good news about Evans. We actually have a sidewalk, a wide sidewalk with a setback. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of gas stations, but they at least put a walkable sidewalk for all the kids who are walking down Evans to go to school at my daughter's school. And, you know, Freeway Ford did a nice little artificial turf that the kids are now using as an impromptu soccer field on the walk down Evans. Small steps, folks, small steps towards Evans improvements.
Yep, I agree. Okay, I'm leaving. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, Councilwoman. And yeah, with that, I guess, unless anybody has a last second thing, we can end it. Thanks again, everyone, for taking the time tonight and all your continued work on this. As I said, the draft plan should be out in the next couple of weeks, so really want your help in promoting that. Tell all your friends, tell all your neighbors. We still have signs. If you need a new sign or didn't get a sign last time, let me know. We'll get you a sign to put in your yard. And talk to your RNOs and let me know if you want us to come present. All right, that's it. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. And we'll talk to you about the next meeting.